Hello, I'm Jonasz Rawiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. On this episode, we're heading east to Samarkand, a historic city famous for stunning architecture, ancient trade routes, and now the latest act of EU diplomacy titled "We Really, Really Want to Be Friends." Also, China scares us a bit. This past week marked the very first EU Central Asia Summit, a diplomatic speed date featuring the European Union and the 5 Central Asian republics: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. What did we find out about this blossoming partnership? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Central Asia is growing in attention for many of the world's powers. While Russia and China have already had a vested interest in this part of the world, the European Union seems eager to not be left behind. This summit is proof of that.
This summit opens a new chapter in our relations because today we launch a strategic partnership, and this partnership shows you can rely on the European Union.
The meeting goes beyond just words, however. Trade between the bloc and the region has been developing, with a focal point being the region's vast natural resources. Kazakhstan, for example, recently discovered what has been dubbed its largest rare earths deposit. Trade in these resources is at the very top of the agenda, but the diplomatic side of this blooming partnership is being headed by Uzbekistan, which has perhaps the closest ties to the EU out of all of these countries.
No one could have imagined then that in the very near future we would stand together to represent the region in negotiations with European leaders.
While Europe has been making inroads with its Central Asian partners, it's not the only one to be doing so. China in particular has been making a very heavy push for Central Asia. After all, this is the region which is especially important to its Grand Belt and Road Initiative. It is expected that in the future, Europe and Beijing will butt heads, and Central Asian nations might have to choose who they want to play with.
And now let's zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Central Asia is growing into one of the world's most heavily contested markets and regions. Although it is not the region's largest or most populous country, Uzbekistan often leads the charge when it comes to diplomacy.
Russia remains a shadow that hangs over Central Asia. Since many of these countries are former Soviet republics, Moscow still holds considerable sway and influence over them. Nonetheless, Uzbekistan has been trying to step away from its Russian-linked past and embrace new partnerships. One of these is relations with the European Union. Since 2016, Uzbekistan has made a serious effort to strengthen its ties with the EU when it comes to trade, various investments, and even tech collaborations. Compared to 2016, trade between the two sides has surged from $2 billion to $6.4 billion in 2024, making the bloc Uzbekistan's most significant trading partner. There are now over 1,000 EU-funded enterprises in Uzbekistan, with a total portfolio of over $30 billion. In fact, many observers believe that Uzbekistan has become one of the EU's most important trading partners. This blooming relationship is also often emphasized with various high-level visits and events, such as the EU Central Asia Summit, hosted by Samarkand on April 4th. The two sides have also signed a roadmap for their strategic partnership, which is meant to facilitate cooperation when it comes to critical raw materials.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Leading the EU delegation were European Council President Antonio Costa and EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen, who arrived ready to charm, strategize and, judging by their smiles, offer a sizable financial carrot. The carrot in question, a €12 billion investment package spanning sectors from transport to digital connectivity. And while €12 billion is a lot, it's clear the European Union sees this as more than just a charitable handout. It is a strategic play in a region where minerals like lithium, manganese and titanium are abundant, materials crucial for everything from renewable energy to smartphone batteries and, perhaps most importantly, defense systems. But why now, you may ask? Well, it might have something to do with President Trump's recent announcement of global trade tariffs, which sent European leaders scrambling to find new friends, and fast. Because when your old friend starts charging extra for steel and aluminum, it's probably time to find a new bestie. Ursula von der Leyen didn't mince words about the EU's motivation, highlighting China's dominance in critical raw materials. Beijing's grip on the global market for these materials is in fact so tight, their proverbial knuckles must be white from the tension. Von der Leyen politely hinted at this when she told Central Asian leaders that some global players are, and I quote, only interested in exploiting and extracting, end of quote. Translation: China's after your minerals, but we promise we're the nice kind of investors, the ones who at least pretend to care about your local economy. Meanwhile, EC Council President Costa emphasized the EU's commitment to multilateral cooperation, a polite diplomatic way of saying Russia's making a mess again. Indeed, Russia's shadow loomed over the summit. No surprise, given that the region has quietly helped Moscow circumvent Western sanctions by re-exporting everything from electronics to luxury goods. But the Central Asian leaders themselves are playing a nuanced game, balancing their long-standing economic ties with Russia against this new, shiny European friendship. They have largely abstained from UN votes condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, carefully maintaining neutrality, presumably whispering to Europe, "It's not you, it's the geopolitical complications, you see." A key focus of this summit we're talking about was enhancing connectivity through the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor, basically Europe's way of saying, let's trade more, but can we route around Russia for this one? If this corridor takes off, goods traveling between Europe and Central Asia could bypass Russia entirely, a move that surely prompted Putin's team to update their Europe Betrayal playlist. This summit highlights Europe's urgent need to diversify away from problematic partners. Whether facing trade wars from the US or economic bullying from China, the EU's pivot to Central Asia shows that they are serious about finding alternatives, even if that means cozying up to countries whose names most Europeans still need Google Maps to find. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Elias Aghili Denavi, Iran Program Lead at the Abbasid Foundation Fund. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello and good morning. Thank you for the invitation and a very huge good morning to our dear audience.
So, judging by the meeting held in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, do you think Central Asia could be about to experience something of an economic and geopolitical renaissance?
Well, indeed, it's a very crucial summit, especially in this time of chaos and turmoil that we are experiencing in the Central Europe and the Eastern Europe. All these events and summits have a history, starting from 2019, 2023, and now 2025. We can see that the Central Asian countries have been doing their best to deepen their ties with the European Union and following the program and initiative introduced by the European Union. Technically speaking, yes, they're looking for a renaissance in different fields of importance. So we can say that all these agreements and summits are for mutual benefits and mutual cooperation. A renaissance in the nature of economic prosperity, security prosperity, and also cultural and research and educational prosperity is what both parties are looking for at the moment. So if I want to talk about the previous summit prior to April 7th of the EU High Representatives for the Foreign Policy and Security Analysis, we can say that this summit was actually aimed to reaffirm the 7 important pillars of cooperation that was previously discussed in 2019 and 2023. So technically, and based on the ground facts, the European Union and the 5 Central Asian countries have been trying to reaffirm what they have previously agreed on during the past summit. So I guess a renaissance is a yes, but not yet achieved.
And of course, there's also a question of Central Asia all of a sudden becoming rather popular. This summit was not the only one of its kind. Before that, during the last couple of years, we had a major summit involving China, another one involving the US. What would you say is going to happen next? Which of the many partners is the most natural and profitable one for Central Asia? Because we have the European Union, we've got Russia, which is there by a long tradition, dating back to the Soviet era, of course, and now experiencing something of a decline, but also China, definitely rising. and the United States likewise are developing an interest in the region. So which one of those is likely to emerge as the winner here?
The Central Asian countries, like any other countries in the international politics and international relations arena, are considered to be rational thinkers. So they will calculate their national interests and then move towards the proper actor or the proper, let's say, ally to rely on. Actually, I want to answer this question first from the European Union side and then move towards the Central Asian countries' perspective. Following the Ukraine invasion, unfair invasion by the Russian Federation, the Europeans are mostly trying to find a new, reliable sources to compensate for the energy, reliance and the possible crisis in the energy sector. The Central Asian countries, especially Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan, are good allies for this compensation. The Trans-Caspian gas pipeline in Turkmenistan and the raw earth and mineral and materials in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are just a few instances of the great opportunity and potentials for the European Union. So this is
especially in the light of the recent reports that Kazakhstan has actually discovered new reserves of rare earth minerals, possibly greater and more valuable than those in Russia.
That's indeed the point blank. That's indeed the point blank. But this is a mutual road. And on the other hand, the Central Asian countries are very interested in the economic initiatives presented by the European Union. One of these packages that is very prominent is the Global Gateway Flagship Initiative, which is a package worth of 12 billion euros presented by the European Union. So this is a very promising and prominently offer. I don't think that the Central Asian countries or individual countries of Central Asia will neglect this opportunity. And we are in a time of trade war. So speaking of the United States, we can see that the Central Asian countries, like any other country around the world, look at the new opportunities offered from the United States with a little bit of skepticism. On the other hand, the Russian Federation might not be a good friend due to different sanctions, due to different political and international law infringement conducted by the Russian government. China can still stay a good ally. I mean, both geopolitically and also in terms of the foreign policy of China, which evolves around the good neighbor policy. So if I want to wrap up my analysis, I would say that the European Union is a very promising and charming ally and a friend to be for the Central Asian countries when it's being compared to the United States and Russia. Regarding China, I repeat myself, China can still remain as a traditional good old friend for these countries.
And also there might be synergies actually between Europe and China, with Central Asian countries taking the center stage. I am referring, of course, to the so-called Middle Corridor. Now, this transportation route would greatly boost trade between China, Central Asia and Europe, but there might be a bit of a problem there, namely that it bypasses Russia. Russia is the alternative route, and Russia definitely wouldn't like to have a new competitor in the form of Central Asia. Do you think there might be, this might be a source of conflict and economic rivalry emerging there?
Well, absolutely, yes. What you've mentioned is a mere fact, and it's a bitter truth, because the Russians absolutely will try to halt or at least kind of procrastinate all this economic process. Hopefully, they cannot block the funds, but they can block the ground operations by indirect sabotage or, I don't know, indirect involvement, by not letting the infrastructures path through the Russian Federation territories. So these are all possibilities. That's why we are witnessing constant summits between the Central Asian prominent actors and the European Union, because both parties are willing to cooperate. There's also another point of concern here, and that's the border security and the security concerns, because we've got also Afghanistan and Taliban that is ruling in that country. So the topics of security and border control is also one of the most important topics that has been highlighted since 2019 and reaching its peak in 2023, 2024, and 2025. So Russian Federation is not the only threat in between. The radical movements and also the not stable borders in this region is also another point of concern. From the outside, the analysts and experts might think that this is more a, let's say, economic summit or trade summit, summits related to trade and cooperation. But let's not forget that the first important point of concern for this summit is interregional and political dialogues. This is what the European Union and the Central Asian countries have always prioritized during their summit.
So that's a starting point, right? But if we actually can return to the question that you raised just a moment ago, namely Russia's capability to interfere, because if we have the idea for the infrastructure of the future middle corridor going from China through Central Asian countries into Europe, do you think that Russia could also interfere in that particular project? Because it no longer runs through its territory, but along the way you have a couple of countries, including Azerbaijan and either Georgia or Armenia. You need to pass through one of these in order for this to work, right? Do you think Russia could be trying to leverage its influence, especially in Georgia, or perhaps stoking some sort of conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia in order to prevent this from becoming viable? Because it's the shorter route, right? It would be preferable for many traders, but Russia wouldn't like to lose its own trade route running through its own territory, its own opportunities. Do you think that we might be seeing something like that happening?
Well, unfortunately, the possibility exists, and I cannot give a no to this a crucial question, because we have seen that the Russians haven't lost their influence, especially on Georgia and Azerbaijan during the past 4 or 5 years, and even after the Ukrainian invasion, their relations have stayed stable. And if they want to deviate the Trans-Caspian pipeline project, which absolutely shares an affinity with Azerbaijan or Armenia, if you want to just see the maps and see this corridor, the alternative options might be very expensive. But because if they want to also pass through Iran and change the corridor, then Iran can also be regarded as a kind of backyard for the Russian influence. Another possible route is to go through Afghanistan, past Pakistan, and through the Indian Ocean or the Persian Gulf, and then through their allies within the Persian Gulf countries, we still have experience lesser influence from the Russian Federation. But that might impose a very high amount of tariffs or economic pressure on both parties. So Russians can cause problems in terms of economic and also operational challenges, of course. So yes, the answer to the question is yes. But regarding the alternatives, they're still staying in a mist of mystery, that what are the alternatives if the Russian Federation tries to halt or procrastinate this process.
So we have this sort of fascinating interplay between challenges presented by the geopolitical situation there, but also the enormous opportunities for all parties involved, really. Elias Agili Denavi was our guest today here on Eastern Express. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and hope to see you soon again.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Ukraine's security service, the SBU, has been instructed to identify the source of the leak that released the draft of the US minerals deal. The agreement has been heavily criticized as highly unfavorable for Ukraine.
According to the Financial Times, Volodymyr Zelensky has authorized the SSU to carry out an investigation into the leak. The process involves the use of so-called lie detectors, with polygraph tests already being administered across several Ukrainian ministries. The current scale of the investigation remains unclear. The President's office itself has declined to comment, while the SSU has said that the investigation remains within the boundaries of Ukrainian law, but that certain details have to remain confidential. The United States minerals deal is a proposed agreement between Washington and Kiev, which would see the former gain significant control over critical Ukrainian mineral and energy resources. The most recent proposal includes the creation of a joint supervisory board, which would manage the revenue from oil, gas and mining projects across Ukraine. This provision has been of particular concern to Ukrainian officials, who worry that it could undermine the country's sovereignty and possible future EU integration.
European defense manufacturers have failed to meet certain targets despite a renewed funding push. The Royal United Services Institute believes that Ukraine could be the key to solving this problem.
A report by the Rusai shows that Russia has been significantly outperforming European defense production in the wake of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This, in turn, the Institute says, poses a strategic threat to NATO's deterrence capabilities. Despite having a much smaller economy compared to just European NATO members, Russia has been able to successfully mobilize its defense industry and heavily outproduce European nations. Analysts warn that this also poses a threat to Ukraine itself, as Kiev is heavily reliant on foreign arms imports to support its defensive campaign. Rusai believes that Russia's success in this regard stems from a centralized approach, which has enabled rapid coordination across the entire defense sector. Ukraine's growing defense industry, at a fraction of the cost that Western countries need to pay, offers a solution to Europe falling behind. Further partnerships and contracts between Ukraine and NATO could shore up the current differences between Western and Russian production.
The British Guardian says that an American neo-Nazi terrorist group has been paying recruits to carry out attacks in Ukraine. The group reportedly has links to the Russian Federation.
The US neo-Nazi group has been offering locals payments for carrying out attacks, according to a report by The Guardian. Russia actively recruits civilians across Ukraine to spy on military targets and sabotage them. Other targets can also include electric power stations, police vehicles and personnel, and even government buildings and politicians themselves. On April the 3rd, for example, at least one person was killed in an explosion in Kiev. The group in question is called The Base and was established in 2018. It was a target of extensive FBI investigations in the past, but under the new US administration, probes into far-right groups have been cut back. Its leader, Ronaldo Nazaro, is a US citizen who currently resides in St. Petersburg. Nazaro is a former FBI and Pentagon employee.
For this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.